Welcome to Craving the Heat, where desire takes the lead and every story leaves you wanting more. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments and keep up with our latest naughty stories. The house had been quiet for weeks. Laura had grown used to the silence, the kind that seemed to stretch across every room, lingering long after her husband left in the mornings and returned late at night. Their marriage had settled into a cold routine. Polite dinners, occasional small talk, and nights spent on opposite sides of a bed that once felt like home. She'd stopped expecting warmth from him a long time ago, and instead she had filled her days with errands, with endless to-do. Lists that kept her from realizing how lonely she truly was. It was nearly midnight when she heard the sound of keys at the door. Her heart skipped, thinking maybe her husband had come home early for once. But when she opened the door, she saw someone she hadn't expected, Ethan, her stepson. He stood there with a small, tired smile, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. He was 24 now, no longer the lanky teenager she remembered. His face had sharpened with maturity, though his eyes still carried the same warmth that had disarmed her years ago. He'd been away finishing school, and it had been months since his last visit. "Hey, Lavra," he said softly, almost apologetic. "I didn't mean to wake you." But she wasn't annoyed. She wasn't even tired anymore. Seeing him standing there felt like someone had thrown open a window in his suffocating room. She hugged him too tightly at first, realizing only after a moment how much she'd missed having another presence in the house. They sat in the kitchen, talking over tea until 2 in the morning. He told her about his life, his frustrations, the uncertainty about his future. She listened, grateful for his honesty. Somewhere between his laughter and the way his eyes lit up when he spoke, Laura felt something stirring inside her that she hadn't felt in years, a sense of being seen. In the weeks that followed, Ethan's presence changed everything. He filled the silence, brought light into rooms that had been dim for too long. They cooked together, shared late-night conversations, watched movies sprawled on the couch. For the first time in years, Laura felt alive, but with that feeling came something else, something she didn't want to name at first. When she caught herself staring too long at the curve of his smile, or when her heart quickened every time he brushed past her in the hallway, she forced herself to look away. This wasn't about him, she told herself. This was about what he represented, the warmth she craved, the connection she'd been starved of. The real crack appeared one evening when her husband came home, already irritated from work. He barely acknowledged Ethan, muttered a distracted "hello," then disappeared into his office. Lavra watched the exchange, and the disappointment on Ethan's face mirrored her own feelings. Later, when her husband was locked away with his laptop, Ethan found her on the balcony, staring out into the night. "You deserve more than this," he said quietly, leaning against the railing beside her. "You give everything, and he doesn't even notice." Her throat tightened, not from his words alone, but from the truth in them. She turned her face away so he wouldn't see the tears forming. And that was when it happened, not a kiss, not even a touch, but a moment of undeniable recognition. They both knew they were standing on dangerous ground. Laura's heart raced with guilt in the days that followed. Ethan was her stepson, yes, but he wasn't the one she wanted. His presence, though, had opened her eyes to what she had been missing all along. And that realization was what led her, slowly, to Daniel. Daniel was a colleague at the community center where Laura volunteered. He was kind, patient, with a quiet smile that always made her chest flutter. She had ignored it before, dismissed it as harmless, but now, with her loneliness laid bare, she couldn't. One late afternoon, after everyone else had gone home, Laura stayed behind to finish some paperwork. Daniel offered to help. They worked side by side, the office silent except for the sound of papers shuffling and pens scratching. And then, when she looked up, their eyes met in a way that was no longer professional. His hand brushed against hers, lingered, and suddenly Laura felt the same rush she'd felt when Ethan returned that night, only this time. She didn't look away. It began slowly, with stolen moments at work-shared coffees, conversations that stretched too long, lingering touches that made her pulse quicken. But soon it became more. She found herself waiting for the day she'd see him, crafting excuses to stay late. And when Daniel finally kissed her, weeks later, she didn't resist. Every kiss after that carried the weight of her years of silence, of the longing that Ethan's late-night visit had awakened in her. She told herself she wasn't betraying her husband so much as reclaiming herself. For once, she felt chosen, cherished, alive. The affair deepened, becoming the secret rhythm of her days. And though Ethan had unknowingly been the spark, it was Daniel who became the fire, yet still. When Ethan caught her one evening with a smile that seemed to know, she felt the air rush out of her lungs. He didn't say anything, didn't pry, but there was an understanding in his eyes. Somehow she knew he saw the change in her, the way she carried herself now, the way her laughter had returned, and Laura realized that maybe his late-night return hadn't been an accident at all. Maybe life had sent him back to remind her that she was still here, still capable of love, still alive. The days blurred into weeks, and Laura found herself caught between two lives. In the daylight, she was the dutiful wife, the stepmother who smiled at Ethan over breakfast, the woman who kept the household running even when her husband barely noticed. But in the evenings, when she knew she could slip away unnoticed, she became something else entirely, a woman rediscovering her youth, her hunger, her ability to feel desire. Daniel had become her anchor in a world that had felt like it was slipping away from her. He was steady, attentive, and completely unlike her husband. He listened, really listened. He'd ask about the smallest details of her day and remember them later. When she spoke, his eyes never wandered, as though she were the only person in the world. That alone was intoxicating. Their moments together grew riskier. At first, it was stolen kisses in the empty office. Then it was quick drives out to a secluded park, where they'd sit in his car for hours, just talking, their fingers laced together across the console. Soon, even that wasn't enough. They began meeting in small rented spaces, hotels with anonymous lobbies where no one would recognize them. Each encounter left Lara reeling, her body humming long after she returned home. She'd lie in bed beside her husband, who was already snoring, and replay every touch, every whispered word Daniel had given her. It felt dangerous, intoxicating, like she was playing with fire and didn't care if she burned. But it wasn't just physical. Daniel saw parts of her she had buried long ago. He encouraged her to paint again, something she had abandoned years into her marriage. He'd surprise her with small gestures, a sketchbook left on her desk, a bouquet of wildflowers tucked into her car. Every action told her what she had stopped believing, that she was worth loving. Ethan, however, noticed. He was sharper than she gave him credit for. One evening, while they were cleaning up after dinner, he studied her in a way that made her heart thump. "You're different lately," he said, tilting his head. "Lighter, maybe happier." Laura's breath caught. For a moment, she worried he had pieced it all together, that he could somehow see her secrets written across her skin. But he only gave her a small smile. "Whatever it is," he said softly, "I'm glad. You deserve it." His words stayed with her that night, a mix of comfort and guilt. Because as much as Daniel filled her emptiness, Lara couldn't ignore that Ethan's late-night return had been the trigger. He had reminded her, simply by being there, of what connection could feel like. Without him, would she ever have had the courage to reach for more? The house felt like a stage now. Her husband continued his endless cycle of work and detachment, barely noticing her comings and goings. Ethan, though, had become her companion in small ways. They'd cooked together, watched old movies, lingered over coffee late into the night. Sometimes the way his eyes lingered on her made her stomach twist. Was it admiration? Affection? Or something more dangerous? Something he would never say aloud? The duality of her life weighed heavily on her. She wanted to live in Daniel's world where love was passionate and easy. But every time she returned home, she felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. One rainy evening, after a stolen afternoon with Daniel, she came home to find Ethan sitting on the couch, reading. The lamp cast a warm glow over him. And for a moment, Laura just stood in the doorway, watching. His presence was comforting, familiar, grounding. And suddenly, she realized Daniel may have given her passion, but Ethan, without meaning to, had given her back herself. That night, when her husband was once again locked away in his office, Ethan found her in the kitchen, staring absently at her cup of tea. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked suddenly, his voice low. She looked up sharply. "Leaving? Yeah, this house. This life, starting over." He gave a small shrug, as if it were nothing, but his eyes searched hers in a way that made her heart hammer. Laura didn't answer. She couldn't. The truth sat heavy on her tongue that she already had one foot out the door, even if no one knew that she had built a secret world with someone who made her feel alive again. Instead, she gave him a faint smile. "Sometimes," she admitted. Ethan nodded, almost knowingly, and let the subject drop. But the question echoed in her mind for days after. Her affair with Daniel grew deeper, more reckless. He began talking about a future, about what it would mean if they were no longer hiding. Laura wanted to believe him, to imagine a life free from lies, but she knew it wasn't that simple. Then one evening, Daniel cupped her face in his hands, his gaze fierce. "You're mine, Laura. You don't have to live like this anymore. You deserve love every day, not just in secret." And for the first time, she considered it. Really considered it. The thought of leaving her husband, of choosing Daniel openly, no longer seemed like a fantasy. It felt like a possibility. But as much as her heart pulled toward him, her guilt held her back. Ethan's words haunted her. Starting over. Did she have the courage? Could she risk destroying everything to save herself? As she lay awake that night, listening to the rain against the windows, Laura realized she was standing on the edge of something irreversible. The late-night knock on her door, the one that had brought Ethan back into her life, had been the beginning of everything. Now, the decision of where it would end lay squarely in her hands. Laura couldn't pinpoint the exact moment when her double life began to feel more real than the one she was supposed to be living. Maybe it was the afternoon when Daniel kissed her in the stairwell, their breaths ragged as they pulled apart at the sound of footsteps. Maybe it was the night she sat across from him at a small Italian restaurant, laughing so loudly she forgot for a moment that she was someone's wife. Or maybe it was the morning she woke up and realized her first thought wasn't of her husband, but of Daniel's hand tracing slow circles across her back. Every part of her wanted more. More moments. More nights. More of the man who had awakened something she thought had died years ago. But every time she walked back through her front door, the reality of her situation crushed down on her like a weight she couldn't shake. Her husband, Ethan's father, seemed more distant than ever. If he noticed the subtle changes in her, the way her eyes lit up, the way she hummed softly while cooking, the way her phone seemed glued to her hand, he didn't mention it. Work had consumed him completely, and with it, his ability to be present. He was often nothing more than a shadow at the dining table, nodding absently to questions. Retreating to his office before dessert was even cleared, but Ethan noticed. He had always been observant, but lately his gaze lingered on her a little too long, as though he was trying to solve a puzzle he couldn't quite piece together. His late-night return had shifted something between them. They spoke more, shared. Quiet cups of tea in the kitchen long after the house had gone silent. He asked her about her day, her dreams, the things she used to love before life dulled them. It was disarming his curiosity, his warmth, and it only reminded her of the affection missing in her marriage. One night, after another stolen afternoon, with Daniel, Laura came home with flushed cheeks and the faint smell of his cologne clinging to her dress. She slipped into the kitchen to compose herself, but Ethan was already there, leaning against the counter, sipping water. "You look different," he said, his eyes narrowing slightly. Her heart skipped. "Different how?" she asked, trying to sound casual. He studied her for a long moment, his gaze unsettling in its intensity. "Like you've remembered how to breathe again." The words hit her harder than they should have. She turned away, busying herself with the kettle, but her hands trembled slightly. "Maybe I have," she murmured, almost to herself. She didn't see the way Ethan's jaw tightened, or the faint sadness that flickered across his face. As weeks passed, her affair with Daniel deepened. He was bold in ways her husband never had been. He'd send her handwritten notes tucked into her bag, telling her she was beautiful, reminding her of how much he craved her. He'd surprise her with lunch delivered to her office on days she was overwhelmed. With him, she felt alive, cherished, desired. But at home, the threads of her double life began to fray. One evening, while she and Ethan prepared dinner together, he said quietly, "You don't have to pretend with me, you know? Whatever's going on, I can see you're carrying it alone." The sincerity in his voice nearly broke her. For a second, she wanted to confess everything to spill out her guilt, her longing, her desperate need to feel whole again. Instead, she forced a small smile and shook her head. "It's nothing, Ethan, really." But it wasn't nothing. It was everything. The more she tried to balance both worlds, the more reckless she became. She and Daniel started planning trips under the guise of work conferences. They lingered too long in public places. They exchanged looks that, to anyone paying attention, spoke volumes. And Ethan was paying attention. One night, as rain tapped gently against the windows, Laura found herself sitting with Ethan in the living room. The power had gone out, leaving the house lit only by flickering candles. They sat close, wrapped in blankets, the silence between them heavier than the storm outside. "You deserve more than this," Ethan said suddenly, his voice low. Almost pained. Laura froze. "What do you mean?" He met her eyes, his expression unreadable. "I mean, this life, this loneliness. You've given so much, and it's like no one even sees you, but I do." Her breath caught. She wanted to speak, to deny it, to say something, anything, but the truth was lodged in her throat. She was lonely. She was invisible in her marriage. And Ethan, with his quiet attentiveness, his late-night conversations, his unspoken understanding, had become a part of the reason she hadn't completely fallen apart. She placed a hand over his, instinctively, and his fingers curled around hers. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The silence charged with something neither dared name. That night, when she finally slipped into bed beside her husband, her mind wasn't on Daniel's passion or her husband's indifference. It was on Ethan's words. The next day, she found herself more restless than ever. Every choice she made felt weighted with consequence. She was falling apart inside, torn between the passion she found with Daniel, the duty that bound her to her marriage, and the strange, quiet pull of Ethan's presence. And yet, no matter how much she tried to suppress it, one truth became undeniable. That knock on the door months ago hadn't just brought Ethan back into the house. It had brought him back into her life in a way she could no longer ignore. Laura knew she couldn't keep living like this. Sooner or later, something or someone would break. Days bled into weeks, and Laura felt like she was living in borrowed time. Daniel filled her with fire. Her heart raced at every stolen glance, every whispered promise. But Ethan brought her stillness, an anchor when everything else spun out of control. And her husband, well, he remained a ghost in their house, present in body but absent in every other way. It was one evening late when everything seemed to shift again. Laura had just returned from a weekend with Daniel. Another lie, another careful excuse. She had kissed him goodbye to the hotel lobby with the same desperation she always felt when leaving him. And yet, when she pulled into her driveway, her chest tightened in guilt. Inside, the house was dark, except for the soft glow spilling out from the kitchen. Ethan was there, sitting at the table, a book in his hand. He looked up when she entered, and Laura froze. His eyes lingered on her longer than usual, scanning her face, her hair, the faint smudge of lipstick she'd forgotten to wipe away. "You're home late," he said evenly, closing the book. She nodded, fumbling for her keys. "Work ran over. A client meeting." Ethan tilted his head, not buying it, but not calling her out either. Instead, he rose, poured her a glass of water, and slid it across the table. "You must be tired," he said gently. The simple kindness undid her. Her hands trembled as she took the glass, her throat tightening. She wanted to scream, to confess, to beg for forgiveness. But for what? And from whom? That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant hum of her husband's computer in his office. The bed felt cold, foreign. She thought of Daniel's warmth, his lips against her neck, the way he made her laugh. She thought of Ethan, the quiet strength in his gaze, the way he made her feel seen without ever asking for anything in return. And in that space between darkness and dawn, she realized she wasn't just being pulled in two directions. She was being split in 3 dots. The next morning, Ethan lingered at the breakfast table after her husband left for work. Laura moved about the kitchen, her back to him when he spoke. "Lavra," he said softly, "I need to ask you something." Her breath caught. "What is it?" He hesitated, then said, "Are you happy?" The question pierced her more deeply than if he'd accused her outright. She turned, her hands clutching the edge of the counter. "Why would you ask me that?" "Because I see you," he said simply. "I see the way your smile fades when you think no one's looking. I see the way you light up sometimes, like someone gave you back a piece of yourself. And I can't stop wondering if it's because of him, my father, or if it's because of someone else." The words hung heavy in the air. Laura's chest tightened, panic racing through her veins. She wanted to deny it, to laugh it off, but the look in Ethan's eyes told her he already knew. Maybe not the details, maybe not Daniel's name, but he knew. She sank into the chair opposite him, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to answer that." Ethan leaned forward, his voice low, urgent. "You don't have to tell me. I just needed you to know. You don't have to keep pretending, not with me." The raw honesty in his words broke something. Inside her, she pressed a hand to her mouth, fighting the sting of tears. For so long, she had been carrying the weight of lies and longing, but here was Ethan offering her a quiet space to unravel without judgment. Their eyes locked, and in that moment, something shifted. It wasn't spoken, but it was there, an unspoken understanding that the lines between them were no longer so clear. Over the following weeks, their bond deepened. It wasn't physical, not yet, but it was dangerous all the same. They shared long talks after dinner, lingering in the kitchen until the clock struck midnight. Ethan would tell her about his work, his frustrations, his dreams of traveling. She found herself opening up to him in ways she never could with her husband, or even Daniel. One evening, after a particularly heated argument with her husband over nothing and everything, Laura slipped outside onto the porch. The night air was cool, calming. She didn't hear Ethan approach until he sat down beside her. "You don't deserve this," he murmured, daughter eyes filled with tears. "I don't know what I deserve anymore." He reached for her hand, hesitating only a second before his fingers brushed against hers. "You deserve to be loved. Properly." Her heart thudded. She should have pulled away, should have created space, but instead, she let her hand rest in his. The warmth of his skin sent shivers racing through her, and for the first time, she didn't fight it. That was the beginning, the start of something she knew was dangerous, forbidden, but inevitable. Ethan wasn't her lover, not in the way Daniel was. But the tenderness, the way he looked at her like she was more than just someone's neglected wife, it was intoxicating, and so Laura found herself more entangled than ever. Daniel's passion filled her body, Ethan's closeness filled her heart, and her marriage was the fragile shell she hid all of it behind. But she knew, deep down, that it couldn't last forever.